Hello there, YouTube. Oh, excuse me, just got done eating, sorry. Hopefully, first of all, new phone case, because I absolutely destroyed my last one. So the audio might be a little weird on this one. Sound a little different because I have a new phone case. So maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse, blah, blah, blah. Let me know in the comments. But today, we're talking about some bayonets, and I got a few of them here. And at cursory glance, you guys might know what these are. They're actually almost entirely the same bayonet, which is a little weird, but when you get to the story of it, it's not as weird as it sounds, because a lot of countries kind of did the same thing, or they just made their bayonets relatively interchangeable. So what we have here, the first one, is the 1907 bayonet. Now, this is the bayonet designed for the short magazine Lee Enfield number 1 Mark III rifle that came out in 1907. So, but the SMLE existed long before that. Now, there was an issue with this because the SMLE number 1 Mark III, and I'm just going to use imperial units for this because it's going to be a little bit easier. But the SMLE number 1 rifle actually came out in 1904. So both of these rifles originated in the Edwardian era. And for the most part, the rifle bayonet standard for the original SMLE, so the one coming out in 1904, was basically just a reiteration of the bayonet for the long Lee Enfield. It had about a 10-inch blade or 12-inch blade. I forget which one it was exactly. But it was known as the 1903 bayonet. And it had a spear tip, and it was a lot like the MLE bayonet. Now, quickly the British realized that there was going to be issues with that bayonet. And the reason that being is that since they had shortened their overall rifle, but they didn't do anything with their bayonet, that left the British soldier at a distinct disadvantage compared to, let's say, other armies of the time. So with bayonet fixed, the original SMLE, so the 1902 SMLE, with its bayonet fixed, was only 4 foot 9 inches long. That's how much reach you had with your bayonet. Now let's compare that to basically the 3 other largest European powers at the time. The French. So the French, with their Rosalie bayonet on their 1886 Lebel, had 6 feet of reach. So a whole foot and 3 inches more of reach. So 15 inches of reach is a lot when it comes down to life and death, especially when they were expecting wars to be still fought in lines at this time. Nobody was really expecting World War I. So the Germans, with the Gewehr 98 and their bayonet, were right around 5 foot 10 inches in length. So with that being pretty good. So 5 foot 10 inches, a little bit less than the French, but it could be arguably said that they had a better rifle that made up for it. And the Germans weren't really super big on bayonets to begin with anyways. They viewed the bayonet as more of a tool rather than a weapon, which is why they have so many different bayonets with so many different purposes and so many different functions and stuff, because they viewed it as more of a tool than an actual thing that you would have on your rifle all the time for fighting. Whereas pretty much everyone else was like, you put your bayonet on whenever you're in combat, and you always have it on. And then the Russians, absurd with their 1891 Mosin and their spike, a full 6 foot 2 inches of reach. So way more reach than the British have. So in 1907, they decide to scrap the 1903 bayonet, which is why they're kind of rare now, because they didn't make very many of them. And they move on to this, and they decide this is a good idea to go with because it's almost an exact copy of something that they had experience with in 1905. They sent advisors to the Russo-Japanese War on the Japanese side, actually. So the British were very keen on how the Japanese were going to handle fighting a European power. So they had advisors on the Japanese side of the Russo-Japanese War. The Japanese at the time were using mostly Type 30 Arasakas and everything like that, and so they basically copied that bayonet for their length. So their bayonet length. So they went on to something like this, but with a few differences that make the SMLE kind of unique compared to the rest of the world, basically, when it comes to bayonets, except for the Germans. So they went to this style of blade. Now, this style of blade's a little bit weird. It is not a spear tip. As you see, the tip is offset towards the top, just like an Arasaka Type 30 bayonet. And the Arasaka Type 30 bayonet, basically, because it's basically a sword, these things are basically swords, short swords, they went very traditional with their bayonet. It looks very katana-esque in its shape. So the British just copied that, blatantly copied that. So it's a fully fullered blade. This is a Remington-made one. Remington-made ones are actually pretty rare because they made like less than 100,000 of them. And then this one is also, if it'll show up on camera, right there, Canadian property marked right by the lug, so it's even more rare because of that. And then it's in absolutely gorgeous condition, as you could tell. So I got this one for a steal, and still quite a bit of money, but a steal for what they're normally going for, even though it's in this good a condition. So the British just blatantly copied the Type 30 bayonet and gave it the full 17.5-inch blade, and this made their rifle and bayonet combination comparable to the rest of the world's bayonets at the time. So bringing it right up to the, taking that 12-inch blade of the 1903 and adding, 8 inches to it, brought it up to where it was comparable to with the Germans and stuff for the most part, as far as bayonet reach goes. Because if they would have made this any longer, it would have been just kind of ludicrous. It's not like a narrow spike like the Russians and the French have, which is why their bayonets were so ludicrously long. This weighs significantly more. It catches on much more. It's just bigger in general, so you can only go so big with it before it just becomes too awkward to carry. And these are very awkward to carry. They're very long. They stick down to on your legs a very long time. They hit and bang on everything, So it's reasonable to believe that this was kind of the max they were going to make a bayonet at. Now, just like the Germans, the British realized that hooking your bayonet over your muzzle can affect barrel harmonics. It affects point of impact and everything, and the Russians also knew that. So, which is why the Russians cited basically all of their rifles through World War II, with some exceptions for cavalry and other stuff, with the bayonet on, because the Russians were very fixated on always having your bayonet on, in case you needed to poke anybody. But the British and the Germans were very aware of that. And it wasn't that other countries were aware, but a lot of other countries were like, it's not really worth the effort. So the British designed their nose cap of their SMLE on the number 1 Mark III to hook onto a bayonet boss, as it's called, which is actually part of the nose cap rather than connecting it directly onto the barrel. So that allowed the bayonet to be much more low profile. As you can see here, the muzzle ring is basically right at the grip. So that allowed them to move to use less material making the bayonet, which makes the bayonet kind of overall stronger. And then, it's one less thing to kind of go damage, less material to break. And it improved the barrel harmonics of the rifle. Now, the SMLE had its own kind of barrel harmonic problems throughout its entire life, for the most part, that wouldn't be solved until later anyways, basically during World War II. But that was something that the British were very concerned about, was how a bayonet affected the accuracy and everything like that. So now they go, in their experience through the Boer War, they really wanted to replace the SMLE because they have a lot of issues. They have issues with the magazine because the magazine sticks out. It's able to be dented very easily. They have problems with feeding, which is why they had 6 different marks of magazine through its entire life. And it just wasn't as a reliable or as user-friendly or as strong of an action as the Mauser action, as the British found out in the Boer War of 1899. So they went up against 1893 Mausers, much like the U.S. did in the Spanish-American War. Even though they were 1895 Mausers, they're still derivatives of the 1893 Mauser action. So I'm just calling it the 1893 Mauser action because it's all the same family of Mauser. Basically, all the cock-on-close Mausers are 1893 Mauser-derived actions. So they go up against these 1893 Mausers, and much like the United States, they come to the conclusion that even though they won, their rifle was grossly inadequate compared to what they were going up against. So they go and they redesign a whole new rifle, and it's going to be the Pattern 13 rifle, and a Pattern 13 bayonet, which we'll get to here. So the Pattern 13 rifle is a 1893 derived action, but it's got some features thrown in from the US 1903 Springfield. It's got some Enfield features in it, very obviously, you know. And so basically a combination of those three rifles make the 1913 rifle. And the 1913 rifle is a 7mm borderline Magnum cartridge, very flat, very fast shooting, really long bolt throw compared to the normal British. It is a cock on close action still, front locking lugs rather than the Lee Enfield's rear locking lugs and stuff like that. But it gets developed and, you know, is almost put into production on the eve of World War I. So, which is why you find there isn't many P-13s that actually exist, but you find P-14s. Now, P-14 is the same exact rifle, but because of the war, and they basically were ready to go, they sent the plans over to America, all right, and just had them made that in the standard service cartridge. So they take the Pattern 13, make it in the standard service cartridge in 1914 after they quickly realized they're not going to have anywhere near enough rifles, and so they adopt the P-13 in 303 British as the Pattern 14. They're all made in America. Every single Pattern 14 is made in America. So, because initially the Canadians couldn't make them. The initial goal was to have Canada make P-14s, and for one reason or another they couldn't, and that's a story within itself. So they go to America, and they're basically buying these things with gold for America to make. And they're made by two companies. They're made by Remington and Winchester. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, what about Eddystone? Well, Eddystone is a part of Remington. So they're a Remington manufacturing plant, just in a different location. They're not a separate company. So there's two Remington plants making it, and then Winchester. This happens to be a Winchester bayonet. And so basically they're like, well, we really like the 1907 bayonet, so we're just going to put the same bayonet on the Pattern 13 and call it good. So this is where you get the Pattern 13 bayonet. Problems quickly arose. They realized that they looked incredibly similar in shape and size, because they basically are the same exact bayonet, actually. So other than the crossguard, they are the same exact thing. So the Pattern 13 and Pattern 14 rifles, their bayonet mounts directly onto the muzzle of the rifle. They realized it was too complicated machine-wise to make the nose cap and the bayonet boss and everything, and they really were realizing that they didn't use them all that much and they didn't need them. So we have this issue here now where you have two bayonets that, as you can see, look incredibly similar in size and shape, and that's just how it is. They're actually the same length, so if you think that one's slightly longer than the other, no, they're actually the same exact blade length, 17.5 inches. They have pretty much the same exact blade. There's a little bit of differences manufacturer to manufacturer, but they are. This is the spine of the bayonet. So the 1907 bayonet is ever so slightly thicker, but that just could be a manufacturer difference. Other than that, they have basically the same fullers, depth and length on them, with slight manufacturer differences. Same blade, same shape, same everything. So they even have the same pommel and take the same bayonet lug, actually. The only difference is that crossguard, as you can see here, if I do this. So you can see there, the 1907 bayonet is meant to take the bayonet boss and is very low to the crossguard, but the muzzle mounted 1914 is much higher. So they realized soldiers were going to have issues figuring out which bayonet is which and determining, you know, in chaos and everything like that, if they lose theirs, which one is correct for what rifle. So all 1907 bayonets have a solid handle, like this, as you can see. And all Pattern 14 bayonets have these two little grooves cut into them. That is the quickest way to distinguish a Pattern 14 bayonet at, you know, a cursory glance from a 1907 bayonet, is the fact that there is grooves or no grooves in the handle, because the grip panels are actually interchangeable, like most of the hardware. The only difference is the crossguard, once again. So that is how you tell a 1913 bayonet from a 1907 bayonet. Now, kind of weird that all 1913 bayonets are called 1913 bayonets, but the rifle they go for is the pattern 14. Well, this will actually fit on a pattern 13 as well, which is why it gets its name. The bayonet was technically adopted at the same time the pattern 13 rifle was, but there wasn't very many pattern 13s made, only a handful for trials actually, because of war. But that's just a neat piece of history I wanted to hopefully show you guys. And this bayonet, super happy to have it, the 1907. We'll be making it into a video once the SMLE gets kind of closer to done, if you've been following that project at all. So far there's only a few videos up of the SMLE project because I'm waiting on some very instrumental parts in order to be able to put it together. Actually, you need a lot of the wood to be able to put the SMLE together. But I'm building one from basically scratch parts. So hopefully, with a little bit of Patreon support and some other stuff, which we're doing good on Patreon, in just a little while we got up to $22 a month on Patreon, which is absolutely fantastic. I love that because right now that's one of the few ways to support the channel, because YouTube has kind of put monetization on hold because of the whole coronavirus pandemic. So I actually haven't even seen what I've made in ad revenue since April because of the coronavirus. They're not processing that right now, so I don't know how much money I've actually made, or if I've even made any, or if they're just calling this whole period a wash, or if it's sitting somewhere and it just is all waiting to be processed. I have no idea. But for a long time there, I made a lot less ad revenue because of the coronavirus and everything like that, and how the markets kind of tanked and whatnot. So if you want to support the channel and everything else, there will be there's a link to the Patreon in my About tab of my channel. I'll put it in the description too here, hopefully, if I remember to do that after the video's done. And then I will, or if you feel like you want to do just a one-time donation, there is also a link to the PayPal in the About tab of my page. So if you click on my little icon, you scroll to the About page, there's two links there. One will say PayPal and one will say Patreon. If you want to do a one-time donation where I get 100% of the proceeds, PayPal is the best way to do it. Or if you want to continually support the channel, you can go through Patreon, which is awesome. Patreon gets you a lot of perks. Right now there's nothing to buy in. As little as $1 can get you in, or as much as you want monthly. I'm hopefully going to have Patreon supporters get onto the Discord, if that's something you're like, the Discord where we could all talk about rifles and guns and other unique stuff. Military history, and you can send me links and other cool stuff. It's the best way to get a hold of me, actually. If you have any questions or want to have a one-on-one with me, that's the best way to do it, is to become a Patreon supporter and get onto the Discord. Eventually, I would like to have Discord members on live streams. If you're interested in doing something like that, that'd be very cool to do, I believe. So if you're willing to support the channel, it's ultimately, in my opinion, that you guys should become part of the channel if you're willing to support it. So, thank you all for watching. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next video. Hopefully you enjoyed this type of thing, and hopefully there's a lot more videos to come. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.